The Yugarthian War lasted for 6 consecutive years, during which King Yugarth waged a protracted war against Rome, marshalling numerous commanders to defeat the king. The Romans achieved only a few victories after Metellus assumed command. However, the machinations of his deputy Marius led to his removal, and the ambitious young Marius assumed command as the campaign of 106 BC drew to a close. Marius's command suffered a baptism of fire at the First Battle of Cirta, where his army was ambushed by a force of 60,000 Mais and Gauls. Cavalry sources conflict as to what happened next, although the Romans certainly defeated Yugarth when they emerged victorious. Marius ordered his army to continue marching to their winter quarters rather than pursue victory and ultimately defeat the king. However, the events following Marius's victory at the first battle contradict the account that Yugarth suffered a crushing defeat. Marius took precautions to avoid being ambushed again on his way to his winter quarters. His army marched in battle formation, with his deputy Sulla leading the rear in a square formation or leading the vanguard. Marius sent his scouts to monitor Yugarth's army and anticipate any potential ambushes. On the 4th day of the march, Marius received alarming reports from these scouts. Enemy forces were approaching the Romans from all sides. Moreover, the size and composition of Yugarth's army differed significantly from any account. Confused and unsure of what awaited him, Marius decided to believe the news. He ordered his legions to maintain their best formations and prepare for the worst. This decision quickly proved correct. His legions trembled to the sounds of the cries of tens of thousands of Mais and Gauls. Battle cries erupted. This was the beginning of the largest attack Yugarth's army had yet launched. The first thing the Romans realized was the enemy's position. They were surrounded by 4 lines. They attacked them from a distance of approximately 90,000 men. According to Salagora, each side had approximately 90,000 soldiers, their largest force to date. We don't have an exact figure for the Roman army, but it's safe to assume they were outnumbered. The Mais then attacked towards the flanks under Saladin and Marius, while the Golan advanced towards the Roman main body. However, not all columns attacked simultaneously. Saho was the first to engage the attacking Mais, ordering his infantry to defend the baggage train, while his cavalry resisted the cavalry as best they could. In addition to the fierce fighting between the cavalry and the legionaries, the Romans also suffered from javelin attacks from the cavalry and were unable to reach Saladin's line. Although some of the cavalry was unable to reach Saladin's line, Bullock, son of Puck, led the Maes's more mobile infantry, which attacked directly in any open area they could find. The Roman vanguard was similarly attacked, but with greater force. This mixed force was personally commanded by Yugarth. The cavalry and infantry fought the fiercest battles to date, with Marius's vanguard doing its best to hold its ground, while Urien's army did its best to break through the Rad. Another split occurred in the force, as Sar's men launched violent raids in May. The final breaking point was Sulla's cavalry, which inflicted heavy damage on May's ranks. Panic spread among these cavalry shortly thereafter, as most of them were defeated and began. Saladin, after fleeing, decided to abandon Cass with his cavalry, leaving the Roman centre completely exposed. Those arriving later in the battle exploited this by repeatedly encircling the Roman lines. When he reached Yugarth, Bacchus was the last to arrive, giving the Romans a rearguard position, allowing the vanguard to advance toward him between friendly lines. Although the sources do not specify the 4th attacking column, it is assumed that fighting had broken out on both Roman flanks by this time. At this time, they were in a difficult position due to the simultaneous attacks and the numerical superiority of Aura's army. When Bacchus and Gogara met, Yugarth shouted, fueling the myth that the Romans were fighting in vain. Marius committed suicide before Yugarth could offer a blood-stained sword to confirm his point. Chaos reigned among the legionaries, uncertain about what to do with Aura's demands. But before any doubt could subside, Saladin's return saved the Romans. The cavalry abandoned the pursuit of the fleeing May and instead engaged the Park's flank. The attack was so brutal that the Park didn't bother to resist, suffering heavy losses upon impact. He decided to flee the battle with his remaining cavalry, The pack left the battlefield, leaving Yura isolated. The Numidian king tried to motivate his men to fight with words and example, but discipline was lacking among his well-trained and organized soldiers. The battle-hardened Romans began to assert their dominance everywhere. Moreover, his conscripted soldiers, mostly from the countryside, were no match for the seasoned Roman warriors who tried to continue the fight. Saladin's cavalry succeeded in encircling Hoja and his loyal subordinates. Yura resisted fiercely. It was a short and brutal battle, but they were no match for Saladin's cavalry. Cesti reveals that, despite everything, everyone on Yura's side and to his left was killed. Yura broke through alone, escaping amid a hail of weapons. He emerged victorious from the vanguard. With their opponents scattered, Marius and his bodyguards swerved to surround the Mao and the Gauls, fighting on the flanks and rear. Suddenly the tide turned. Yuga's army found itself fighting on every front and being attacked from the rear. Most of the soldiers quickly realized they were on the defensive and fled in panic at the sight of their king. The last Roman warrior, Rugarank, resisted and fled. Salo described the pursuit. The scene on the open plains during the pursuit was horrific. Horses were slaughtered or captured, and men lay on the ground, many wounded, lacking the strength to flee or the will to survive. They struggled to rise, their bodies collapsing before their eyes. The battlefield was littered with weapons, armor, and corpses, covered in blood-soaked dirt. Although the exact number of casualties is unknown, it is likely that Yuga's army suffered a devastating blow. The objective shifted after the Second Battle of Central Asia, although Yuga again avoided focusing on capturing or killing the Numidian king in battle and instead sent a diplomatic envoy to Bas. The Maran king had lost a large portion of his army during the previous battles. Furthermore, he realized the consequences of his gamble against Rome, and there was no way to avoid Roman retaliation. Within a week of losing the battle, he sent a diplomatic envoy to Maros to open the gate. After some consultation, Bacchus received a very clear offer of Girtha's surrender and Rome's tolerance of his participation in the war. Salus, Marius's deputy, travelled to Bacchus's court to negotiate a deal. However, according to Salus, Bacchus, with Girtha in the background, planned to kidnap Salus and hold him for ransom to demand peace. It is doubtful this would have succeeded, as Salus was only a deputy commander from the lower nobility at the time and would have been unlikely to be believed. All that is known is that Bacchus invited both Salus and Girtha to his corpse, both ignoring their true allegiance until the last moment. However, Bacchus recognized Rome's power, so when the opportunity arose, he ordered the assassination of Yuga's bodyguard and the arrest of the king. He handed him over to Salus, who brought him and Marius to Rome, according to Orosius. Marius celebrated his triumph on January 1st, 104 BC, while Girtha and her sons paraded through the streets. Plutarch recounts how he met the king. Finally, it is said that when he led Girtha to victory, he lost his mind. After the victory, he was thrown into prison, where some tore his tunic from his body, while others were so diligent in removing his golden earring that they tore his earlobe.
Hercules! How cold his Roman baths must be, but wretched he is after struggling with hunger for 6 days and until the last moment.
Holding on to his will to live, he paid the price for his crimes. We do not know why Yuga ended up meeting Bacchus at his court. Salus and Aroa implicitly attribute this to naivety, although a man of Yuga's cunning would have known that Bacchus had no choice but to betray him. We will never know for sure. All that is known is that the man who defied the might of Rome for years met his end in Rome. The invincible Bacchus was rewarded and given his title. The Roman ally retained his Mauritanian crown and gained a third of western Nida. Golan's half-brother was installed as the new king, and Golan became an independent entity from Numidia. Ironically, Bacchus was the clear winner of the war, having initially sided with the losing side. His kingdom was small at the outbreak of the war, but by its end, its territory had grown significantly, not to mention the power brought by Rome's ally. Numidia was only divided after 2 civil wars. Half a century later, 2 more civil wars broke out, and the western part retained its independence. In contrast, the eastern part was added to the Roman province of Africa. A century later, in 40 AD, Caligula annexed the kingdom and divided it into two new provinces.